After today, waifu tax got a whole nother meaning.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today it's Tuesday, so you know what that means. It's Overdress Day. And today we've got some more information as well as new card reveals for the 5th starter deck, which is the Brandt Gate starter deck. And oh boy, does it have a lot of spicy things, because we knew that there was going to be a unique mechanic with the whole locking or imprisoning thing that the trial deck or starter deck was going to do, and we had some speculation that this might be something to do with field-like spells in the order department. And after today, we can confirm that that is exactly the case. So without further ado, let's jump straight into these new cards, because there's also a new mechanic that we need to talk about. Or should I say, not one new mechanic, but in actuality, two new mechanics. Because the main gimmick for the Brandt Gate starter deck is prison and imprison. Now, as you can see in this image, there's a lot that suddenly is thrown at you, because as you can see here, we can apparently imprison our opponent's cards, we can set an order prison, and our opponents can apparently call those cards by paying a cost. Yeah, that's a lot to go over, so let's dissect this piece by piece to clarify everything about this. So first things first, this Imprison mechanic actually entices two different new mechanics in Vanguard. The first one has to do with the new type of order cards, because this card that facilitates this whole playstyle, this mechanic, is a new type of order card called Set Order. And in this case, Set Order Prison order card. These are once again a new subclass of normal orders, just like the music orders that we had for Bang Dream. Now, how does this order actually work? Very simple. It's just like any normal order card that we have. We can play it from our hand in the main phase, but instead of just activating and disappearing and sending it to the drop zone, this one is placed onto the field in your order zone, which is the square box above your damage zone. And once you place them into the order zone, they stay there until the end of the game. Now, that is how these set orders function. Now we get to this specific set order card, which is a prison card, which allows us to use the prison and imprison mechanic. How this basically works, it's effectively the same as the bind mechanic of Narukami, where you could bind your opponent's rear guards or your opponent's cards. But instead of sending them to the bind zone, this new Brandt Gate playstyle, this Brandt Gate archetype, just sends them to your order zone underneath the prison card itself. And the unique factor about this is that your opponent could potentially get those units out of your prison by paying a certain amount of cost. And to really see that in action, let's take a look at this particular order card itself, as here we have the grade 1 order card, or should I say the grade 1 set order prison card, which is Galaxy Central Prison Galactolus. And it has the following abilities. Of course, we have this text between brackets, which is after a set order is played, put it into your order zone, aka you use the normal order and it immediately moves to the order zone itself. Now, its unique ability is cost. Rest one of your units to play this card, although when this card is put into your order zone, soul charge free. So the unique effect about this order card is that to be able to play the card, you need to rest one of your units. This could be your Vanguard, this could be one of your rear guards. And on top of that, you get free soul, which can be useful if you are a soul reliant deck. Now, the interesting thing about this order card in particular is that it's a grade 1 order, meaning if you went first, you cannot attack with your Vanguard anyways. So just resting your Vanguard to be able to call this thing might be actually a really good strategy to get full value out of every single resource you might use in the game. Because if you went second, you need to call rearguard from your hand and able to play this order card on your very first turn. But that's of course not everything that this card can do. It also has the continuous in order zone ability. When your opponent can normal call a rearguard, they can perform the following. Soul Blast 1, if they do so, they choose one of their imprisoned cards and call to the rearguard circle. Counterblast 1, if they do so, they choose two of their imprisoned cards and call them to the rearguard circle. So, as I just explained, you can imprison your opponent's units and that is effectively the same as binding them, which we could do with Narukami. But instead of them being into the bind zone and your opponent has no way to getting them back anymore, they can opt to pay the cost either to Soul Blast 1 to get 1 card or Counter Blast 1 to get 2 cards. This way we have a control mechanic where your opponent still has some way to interact with your playstyle, but it comes with a cost to get them out of prison. And this is basically an homage to the bill system, to bill somebody out of prison by paying an X amount of money to get them out there, which is a really interesting take to reference that in a little bit. And game mechanic wise, this is really interesting because even if they might overpower this mechanic in the future by allowing the Galaxy player to imprison a lot of cards out of the get-go, or maybe even imprison cards from the top deck of your opponent's deck, there is still a way for your opponent to interact with you because they can still potentially pay an X amount of cost to get those cards back and onto the field. Now, there are some really important aspects about this mechanic, which they covered in the Q&A around this imprison mechanic, so let's go over those Q&A first before we dive into the support cards that allow us to actually imprison these units. So the first question they asked is, if there is only one Galaxy Central Prison Galactolus in the order zone, can I place only 1 card from my opponent? No, you can imprison multiple cards. Very simple, you can imprison as many cards as you want underneath one prison, it doesn't really matter for that fact. When calling from prison, can I perform Soul Blast twice? Subsequently, can I Counter Blast twice? Yes, you can. You can use and call multiple times from prison as long as you're able to pay the cost. So this makes sense because it doesn't state once per turn on the ability, it's a continuous effect, so as long as they stay in their main phase, aka allowing them to normal call, they can keep paying the cost to get those cards out. So if your opponent has a really good resource management or a really good resource engine, then they can get their units back forever, and this can keep going on and on and on. As for the third question, if I call from prison, can I call regardless of the current grade of the Vanguard? Yes, you can. Calling from prison is treated as a superior call, therefore you can call regardless of your Vanguard's grade. So this is important to note that when your opponent calls from the prison, it is regarded as superior calling. This can come up in certain interactions. A very important take, which they also gonna refer into another question, is with the overdress mechanic of Dragon Empire. To overdress, you need to normal call from hand. So even if Verena is in the prison and you have a Trickster in your field, your opponent cannot overdress by calling this Verena from the prison, as it's not the same as normal calling from hand. So these are important details to note. For the fourth question, after calling from prison, can I use the ability of the called unit when placed? Yes, you can. You can use abilities of cards that are triggered when placed. So this is really important if you are imprisoning your opponent's unit. So you need to be careful when imprisoning certain cards with strong unplace effects, because that means your opponent has effectively the chance to use them multiple times throughout the game if they want to use a Soul Blast or a Counter Blast to get them back onto the field. Now for the fifth question, can I place multiple set orders in the order zone? Yes, you can. Even with a set order in the order zone, you can still place set orders. So this is interesting because that means you can play as many different set orders in your order zone and they don't interact with each other, which is interesting to say as it allows you to just play them for what you want. Now with this particular prison card, you might think to yourself, what's the point? Because it doesn't add on the cost for your opponent to pay for get them out. It doesn't stack. The only advantage you get out of playing a second of those prison cards is that you get free soul. So if you really need the soul, you can just play the card, which is nice. Now for the sixth and final question, if Verena in overdress state is imprisoned, does it move to prison together with the original dress, aka Trickstar? Yes, it moves together with original dress. When it moves to the order zone, the overdress state will be removed and Trickstar and Verena will be imprisoned as separate copies. So this is really important because this is somewhat of a nerf for the Dragon Empire mechanic with the whole overdress thing. It allows Brandt Gate to immediately send multiple cards to the prison, and it probably means that the Dragon Empire player need to pay way more costs to get their unit out of the prison itself. Now that basically explains the set order mechanic as well as the new imprison mechanic. Basically, if you don't still a bit confused about it, it's very simple. It's a field spell that stays onto the board, which you can play just like any normal order card, and the Imprison mechanic is basically Vanquisher bind mechanic, but your opponent has the potential to get his units back by paying an X amount of cost, which is stated on the prison card itself. Will we get other prison cards in the future? It's likely, but not 100% confirmed. So the cost on these cards might vary from one version to another, and we have to wait and see that for future reveals before we know actually more details. With that explained, let's dive into the actual units themselves, which will interact with this prison mechanic and the prison card itself. So first up, we have the Grade 1, which is Aurora Battle Princess Kai Knight Blue. And her abilities are auto. When this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, search your deck for up to one prison card, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. This is incredibly good, because you're always gonna ride this Grade 1 because of the right deck, which means you will always have your prison card from turn 1, and if you went first, as I explained, you can immediately rest her and play the order card, because you cannot attack anyway, so might as well get use out of the fact that you can rest your Vanguard without losing resources. So this deck immediately looks like a going first deck to gain more value off of everything. And on top of that, because this card searches out your order card, you can probably just get away with just running one prison card and that's it. Of course, if you want to get value of the extra soul, then you might want to play more, but if that's not going to be an issue, then you can easily just run one prison card. Of course, because this card specifically searches for prison cards, if we get multiple prisons, you can run one out of different prisons and just get the prison card you need for a specific matchup, which is actually really interesting. So if this is gonna be the pure control archetype for Vanguard, then having this type of searchers and being able to play against certain matchups is really powerful. It could make some for interesting deck design space. So I'm very excited for this one. Then for the second ability, which is kind of okay, as that's auto, when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, if one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, cast Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1 and draw a card. Basically, you need to have one card in your prison, it can draw a card. For a Counter Blast Soul Blast, kind of heavy, but seeing as we can generate a lot of soul with playing the prison itself, it's effectively just a Counter Blast in that sense, which is okay. It's fine. Then next up, we've got the Grade 2, which is Aurora Battle Princess Risha Pink. And Risha Pink has the abilities auto. When this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and imprison it in your prison. Now, this sounds really powerful, and it somewhat is. It basically gives you one free prison card, and that means that you can maybe fulfill the condition for your grade 1 to draw a card. But more importantly, it's a -1 on your opponent's hand. But it's also not actually a -1, because again, of the whole Imprison mechanic, your opponent can get the card back by either paying one soul or potentially one counterblast and getting another card back as well. So you could basically see this as an unplace and then waste one soul of your opponent or half of a counter blast. As soon as it's free, it's actually kind of decent. It basically just disrupts your opponent's resources. But it could also backfire a little bit, because if you went first, this means your opponent is still at grade 1. So next turn, they ride up to grade 2. But if you rode this grade 2, they could have potentially imprisoned in grade 3, which has a very powerful rigor effect, and then next turn they can just Soul Blast 1 and immediately call that card onto the field and have a very strong beater. Like a good example of something you don't want to happen is that some clan has some type of Volco Ghost type of card, which is a gigantic beater which you cannot normal call it from hand, and then they use this mechanic as a way to cheat it out on the board. Now of course I'm aware that even then it doesn't work with Volco Ghost, because I think you need to specifically place it locked onto the board, not to keep getting it retired, but you get the gist of what I'm referring to. So this could backfire you if your opponent has the cards and the ways to play around it. So be careful with this particular effect. Now, Reset Pink also has a secondary effect, which is continuous rigor circle. If one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 2k. So it's a 12k attacker. This is basically the same as the Dragon Empire grade 2, that probably you won't play it in your main deck. It's mainly as a right deck target, and even for that, might not actually see play because of the potential backfiring of her Vanguard on right skill, as I just explained. So depending on what other future options we get, this card might or might not make the cut once we get the actual set. Now, as for the main boss unit, the main grade 3 of Brandt Gate, we've got Aurora, Battle Princess, Seraph, Snow. And she has a very interesting effect, because she has continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, if one or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets power plus 10k. And if 3 or more cards are imprisoned, this unit gets drive plus 1. So that it really tells us that this deck starts to gain more value the more and more cards are in the prison itself. And that creates a very interesting dynamic with your opponent, because in certain situations, your opponent would just let those cards be into the prison and just thinks, I'm not gonna pay the Soul Blast or not that Counter Blast, I have still plenty of more cards in my hand and can do the plays. This is basically how you would play against Vanquishers, you could not get those cards back. But in this particular instance, you might want to pay the Counter Blast and Soul Blast to just keep them off of their potential powerful skills like this free extra drive check. And you could not do this against Vanquisher. If Vanquisher could bind an X amount of cards, they're done, they're at full power, and you're basically screwed. In this case, the opponent has some leeway to stop it, but it means they're gonna waste resources which they could have used for an offensive play. So this deck creates a very interesting dynamic where it wants to ramp up this prison amount of cards to become stronger itself, whereas your opponent then tries to counterplay it, but at the same time they then diminish their power output, which makes it for this deck easier to sustain and keep it going for the long game. So it's very interesting how this defense / control mechanic works, and I'm very curious how they're going to build upon it. But of course, the grade 2 isn't the only card that allows us to prison cards, as this grade 3 is the main card so far that allows us to do us, as she also has the effect, act on Vanguard the rearguard circle, once a turn, cost counter plus 1, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards and imprison them in your prison. So this basically allows you to imprison 2 cards for the cost of 1 counter blast, which effectively allows you to keep trading off. Because for 1 counter blast you imprison 2 cards, but your opponent can also counter blast 1 to get those 2 cards back out of prison and back onto the field. So if you can generate more resources than your opponent, then eventually you get a surplus on the cards in your prison, especially with the grade 2, which allows you to imprison 1 card for free. Now there's one more interesting feature about this deck, which I'm not going to cover in this particular video because this video is going long enough for what it is, but it's an interesting thing which might not be as apparent right now, but it's something that I wished was in Vanguard for a long while now, and we had seen it to some tidbits here and there, but I think this deck is probably gonna be the deck that can do this. But not as the primary playstyle, but as a result of its actual playstyle. And what that particular thing is something that I will leave for you to figure out for now, as that's a video I'm probably gonna dive into later this week once I have a little bit more time. So with that said, that's about everything that I want to discuss and talk about these new cards for Brandt Gate. Yes, this video is going a bit longer than I wish, but I want to clarify this set order mechanic as well as the Imprison mechanic as clear as I could. Maybe I did, maybe I made it even more confusing. I'm sorry if that's the case. But with that said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below what you guys think of these new cards for Brandt Gate, this new Imprison mechanic, as well as a set order mechanic as the pseudo field spell for Vanguard. And yes, or should I say, and no, MST does not negate. It's a overused joke, but it's kind of appropriate for this situation. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.